the night, this world were bright, we will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright, we will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend and I do horror-related things on the internet, and I'm doing a movie review video for the first time in a good long while. But before I get into any of the details of what it is I'm reviewing, and you already know what that is because you clicked on the video, I just want to promote a few other things. And I am all gothed up, like a little bit more than usual, because tonight, as of my filming this, I am going to be on a live stream with my wonderful Sanderson brothers, Tristan and Hobbs, Collector Man and Hobbs Horror, respectively. We are going to be watching the 90s classic that is The Craft. But by the time this video goes up, that will have already happened, so I am just going to link that somewhere up here in the card so you can go watch it. If you missed it, I will have promoted it on social media already, so hopefully you were there. But that is why I am especially spooky right now. Not that I, need a justification for that or anything. The other thing I wanted to promote is my friend's new YouTube channel. He is a lovely human being, and he has been live streaming on Twitch for a while now, but he just started uploading some of his Twitch stuff to YouTube and now has a YouTube channel, so I would just say go promote his stuff in general. His username is either Sailor Shark or Shark Sailor. I've forgotten the order in which those things go, but I will be linking his YouTube channel below, and most likely that will have links to his other stuff. He is not primarily making horror content, but he does a lot of art and a lot of gaming and is just a really chill and cool person. So if you could go and support the things that he does, I would be very grateful. And with that, let us get into this movie review. And I am, of course, talking about the 1998 movie, The Faculty. This is a movie that a few different people asked me to watch when I just offhandedly mentioned that I picked it up in a live stream I did a while back. Those people included Trenchy, the Soulless Trenchcoat, and Creepy Cody, who were both on the live stream with me, so I will link their channels somewhere, but I'm sure there are a bunch of other people who were in the chat of that stream who also suggested that I review this and that I'm missing, and for that I am sorry. If you were one of the people who asked me to review this, let me know, and if you have a channel, I will also promote you. But The Faculty, once again, came out in 1998. It was directed by Robert Rodriguez, who is known for directing such wonderful movies as Planet Terror, From Dusk Till Dawn, Alita Battle Angel, and most importantly, of course, Stab. And on that note as well, this movie was written by the amazing Kevin Williamson, who wrote Scream, Scream 2, and Scream 4, I believe. It stars Josh Hartnett, who was in 30 Days of Night, Halloween H2O, and Rodriguez's Sin City, Clea Duvall, who was in But I'm a Cheerleader, Ghosts of Mars, The Grudge, and one of my favorite, I can't say appearances in this case, but she played the invisible girl in the Out of Mind, Out of Sight episode of Buffy. Elijah Wood, who would go on to play, of course, Frodo in Lord of the Rings, was also apparently in Back to the Future Part 2, which I have not seen in its entirety, as the video game boy. I don't know what that means, but I assume he's the one who wins. And he was in the remake of Maniac. And this movie stars Jordana Brewster, who was in the Fast and the Furious franchise, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, and Random Acts of Violence. And I realized towards the end of this movie as well that one of the titular faculty is played by Piper Laurie, who I of course know for playing Carrie's twisted mother in Carrie. So this movie follows a group of teenagers in high school who begin to suspect that the teachers and other faculty at their school have been overtaken by aliens, a la Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which they have been. And so they have to stop the takeover from spreading further. That's basically the plot, but there's a lot more to it than that as well. The score was done by Marco Beltrami, who also did the music for Scream, very recently did the music for the Fear Street trilogy, and did the score for a million other things, including A Quiet Place. His score is not the first thing we hear in the movie. We hear a nice little rock track, but once we get to Marco Beltrami's score, it's very much the signature Beltrami, moody orchestral stuff that I love. At some point, there's also a little bit of a kind of electronic beat that gets mixed in there somewhere, which feels very late 90s, even though I wasn't alive then. It just feels like something that a lot of movies then probably did. And then the songs that got chosen to be in the soundtrack of this movie make me super happy. It's a lot of 90s rock bands, and a lot of 90s rock bands doing covers of earlier songs that really fit the vibe of what this movie is and is inspired by. So covers of School's Out and 18 by Alice Cooper, a cover of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 by Pink Floyd, and a cover of Changes by David Bowie during the credits, which I thought was brilliant. And story-wise, this movie knows what it is right off the bat. It's very much all about distrust of authority and to some degree a criticism of the educational system. And even before the aliens arrive, it is absolutely doing that. And you've got them talking about how their town is a football town. They're cutting funding for any of the other things that are actually going to benefit the arts or education at the school, just so they can put more money into sports, because that's what's the school board wants, and that's what's keeping the town alive. And then the shit hits the fan, or more accurately, the pencil hits the hand. The football coach gets pod peopled. Also, probably should have said that this is not going to be spoiler free at all, so you should probably go and watch the movie first if you want to see the movie without any spoilers. But the coach gets pod peopled, and then there's this really menacing scene where he comes in and is talking to the principal and asking for a pencil. And once he gets that pencil, he stabs it right through her hand. And as soon as that happens, everything just gets turned up to 11, and we are fully in sci-fi genre movie land from that time. Occasionally, it does back off to establish kind of this teen movie setting first, but it very quickly dives headfirst into sci-fi horror territory. And that opening scene, just because we aren't really as familiar with these characters, we've literally just been introduced to them, really tries to draw out the suspense, and it didn't do that much for me, just because we're watching this principal run for her life, and we've literally just seen her be very complacent in letting the school board do whatever it wants. And I'm not dissing her as a character. I think she's fine. I just don't really know her, and I don't have as much invested in her. But it's really drawing out the suspense in this opening scene. And that might just be me, but it didn't really pull me in the way I think it was meant to. But the payoff of that scene has this nice little twist that absolutely got me and I thought was wonderful. And after that cold open, we get the titles, and then we are introduced to our main cast of characters. It has the quippy dialogue and the overall tone of a lot of the just teen movies and shows that I love at this time. Things earlier, like The Breakfast Club, which I feel like this movie is kind of poking at and deconstructing a little bit. Things like Empire Records, and then just other teen-oriented horror movies like Kevin Williamson's own Scream and The Craft, and other things that are very much kind of contemporary with this movie, even Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This has the tone of a somewhat gorier and longer episode of Buffy. And within that, we also have this major influence of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which they very quickly acknowledge, because Elijah Wood's character of Casey flat out brings it up, I think. Either he brings it up or Clea Duvall's character, Stokely, brings it up. And much in the same meta fashion as Scream, they full-on acknowledge that influence and then start taking it apart too. And they start analyzing what actually happens in Invasion of the Body Snatchers and how that might theoretically apply to their own situation. And Stokely also just flat out says, Invasion of the Body Snatchers ripped off this other book, The Puppet Masters, anyway. I just love those little nerdy bits that Kevin Williamson puts in there, because it's clear that he loves the genre and he's done his homework, and he wants his characters to have done the homework as well and be very meta to a degree about the genre he's in, while never like breaking the fourth wall or anything, still very much being within that genre. And there's also a tiny line of dialogue where one of the kids, I forget his name, but he's the one who sells drugs and tapes of porn to people at the school and things that he's not allowed to be selling. But he, at one point, sells these kids like a tape that allegedly has a naked Neve Campbell on it. And given that Kevin Williamson wrote Scream, I can't imagine that being unintentional. I don't know what the intent was there. Maybe it was poking fun at the people who came to Scream expecting the kind of nudity that's in an 80s slasher and didn't get it. I would hope so, but frankly, I don't know. I just find it interesting and kind of funny that the writer of Scream wrote that into the script of the faculty. The way this movie deals with its Invasion of the Body Snatchers-esque storyline in things like the 50s movie, you very much get the sense that it's kind of this metaphor for the Red Scare and communism and, oh God, they're gonna take us over. It could be any one of us. The invaders are the outsiders, but there's also that quality of dehumanization and lack of emotion behind their faces that is the thing that I think gives Invasion of the Body Snatchers its staying power and makes it so scary. With this story, the aliens aren't emotionless per se, but they lose the personality and the individuality they once had to be overtaken by something else nonetheless. And the way it's presented within the structure of a teen movie with these outcast teens like Stokely, who's kind of the goth girl who is allegedly a lesbian. I'll get into that in a minute. And the geeky, scrawny, picked on kid that is Casey, and seeing them, ostracized by their fellow students. And in the case of Casey, alienated from his own parents in a way that I thought was heartbreaking. It takes the idea that you have this select group of outsider individuals who see things in the world that nobody else sees, and because they see those things and because they're willing to talk about them, people think there's something wrong with them. And that very much feels like a very apt metaphor for queerness or being neurodivergent. And I have no doubt that there is some queer subtext and queer coding, and even to some degree, again, I'll get into it, like an overt discussion of queerness in this movie. I don't know so much about the neurodivergent thing, but whether or not that's like actual intentional subtext or anything, as someone who is both of those things, it feels very relatable, and it will probably feel relatable to anyone who feels ostracized or like an outcast for any reason. And I think that's fantastic that it manages to have that heart within the writing and then also just be a really fun teen movie meets alien horror romp. And the aforementioned guy who was selling drugs winds up, the fact that he sells drugs in the school ends up being a pretty significant plot point, because we eventually find out that the drugs are what kills the alien parasite that is inhabiting people. And we also find out that these drugs that we thought were probably something just really hard are mostly caffeine pills and random stuff he got from home, which is still holy shit, but feels to a lesser degree kind of like the discovery that everything at the Double Meat Palace in Buffy is made out of vegetables. Sorry, spoilers for Buffy. But then they use that to bring in elements of another story that deals with the loss of identity and not knowing who the people around you are, and aliens, which is of course the thing. After they find out that this drug can kill the alien. And they discover this by testing the parasite on this poor little rat. So, content warning for animal death, like really, really sad animal death. But they find out that this caffeine drug kills the alien parasite, and they end up all doing something that's very much like a reworked version of the blood test scene from The Thing, but with all of them having to sniff drugs to prove that they are not the alien. I thought it was just this delightful, perfect reworking of this, what was likely like a classic horror sci-fi scene at that point. I don't know how much of a cult classic The Thing had become at that point, but I'm guessing that people like Kevin Williamson and Robert Rodriguez at least appreciated it. And by the end of the movie, they've been talking about the fear that the alien parasite is going to spread and infect the rest of the world and, at least the rest of the town, because it took over pretty much the whole school except for these 6 kids in like a day and a half, I think they say. So there's the idea that it's going to overtake the whole town, but that doesn't necessarily raise the stakes in the time they have to wrap up the movie. But what I think they do that's brilliant is they've already established that this is a football town, and that is what like half of the town comes to the school for. So by the end of the movie, like the whole town is congregated in the stands of this football field, and whoever isn't there is probably going to get infected anyway. But we're just seeing all of these football players getting pod peopled as the alien infected coach just smiles and looks on, and this cover of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 plays, and it's just perfect as a scene, and it's also a perfect way to just raise the stakes towards the end that feels completely natural with what's already been established, because if they didn't have that aspect of it being a football town, it would be really hard to find a way to raise the stakes to, holy shit, the whole town's going to be infected, without it feeling really contrived, but it feels really natural within what they've already established, and I thought that was great. And then the big old plot twist happens towards the end, and I haven't even gotten into the characters yet, so I don't think I can adequately talk about that, but I have many a thought, so I will get to that when I get to the characters. But first, I need to talk about the effects, because overall, I thought they were pretty good. You've got some very gnarly moments of body horror, whether it's minor little things like having your hand stabbed through with a pencil, or it's something really big like the side of your head peeling off. But it's these very gnarly body horror moments with an alienish twist that don't feel quite as like over the top as anything you'd see in The Thing, but are really well done. The really over the top alien stuff in this is all basically CGI, and it's fine for what it is. I thought their ideas were really fun, but if a lot more of that had been practical, I just think I would have liked the whole thing even more. I still love it, and because of that CGI, it just, again, kind of felt like I was dealing with the same effects I would be watching on like an episode of Buffy. But if they had been able to go practical with a lot more of those alien moments, I think it would have just made the whole thing even better. And there's also just a little moment where one of the teachers gets his fingers cut off with a paper cutter, and then they start crawling around on the floor of their own accord. And I was just like, Phantasm fingers, because that immediately reminded me of Phantasm. And that doesn't really have any bearing on anything, but if you like the crazy kind of weird alien body horror that's in Phantasm, you will probably like a lot of the stuff that's in The Faculty as well. Character-wise, I love this little group of characters. Sometimes they're just kind of douchey teens, but that's part of why I love them. We are introduced to our primary cast of characters through their names kind of flashing on the screen and then a freeze frame of them, which I thought was really charming. Elijah Wood as Casey is just so tiny in this movie. Like, he's way younger than I'm used to seeing him, and I just thought he was adorable, but he's still just a powerhouse actor and steals the show as a character who is like ostensibly the main character. And within 2 seconds of seeing Stokely, I had decided that she was my favorite character, because I'm a walking stereotype and I have really aggressive aesthetic attraction towards all things gothy. So, and I ended up loving her character a lot more once we got more into her. And one of this group, I'm going to forget basically all of their names except for Casey, Mary Beth, and Stokely, and maybe one other guy whose name I have written down but probably forgot. But the one who's the jock who is trying to get more into academics. I love that for him as character. I love seeing characters who have like these expectations of being tough and hypermasculine, trying to escape that. They don't do a lot with that in the story character-wise, except for having the coach be okay with that and having that be the sign that he's been pod-personed. But that sort of way that all of these characters are kind of a type, but they're also kind of breaking out of that type, and the way that causes suspicion towards maybe you're a pod person, I thought that was well done. And then there's the whole aspect of Stokely. So right off the bat in this movie, I forget her name. I knew it at one point, but the character who's like kind of the mean girl of the group flat out tells Mary Beth, who's kind of the new girl there, that Stokely is a lesbian. Mary Beth seems to be very okay with that. Stokely just constantly has this wall up against everyone else and is immediately just like, fuck you. The other girl makes a joke about them being girlfriends, and Stokely says, fuck you again, and then they end up talking about it, and Stokely ends up saying, I'm not actually a lesbian, that's just like, that's my defense mechanism, the thing I put up as kind of a wall of security to keep boys the fuck away from me. And then she ends up having a character arc where she falls in love with a guy later, and given the twist that happens later in this movie, I can't see this really working, but they like joke about it and make it like a defense mechanism for Stokely, but I would have actually loved to have seen Mary Beth and Stokely end up being girlfriends by the end of the movie. But that definitely doesn't happen, and she ends up having a character arc where she falls in love with a guy. So I have made an executive decision and decided that Stokely is bi, and you cannot change my mind about that. And the reason that Stokely and Mary Beth cannot get together by the end of the movie is that we find out that Mary Beth is the alien queen, essentially, the one that they have to kill all of the other ones. So that definitely wasn't going to work out, and the reason she was being so friendly to everyone, and I very much wanted her to just actually be this nice, friendly character by the end, but it was her way of sneaking in and breaking down everyone's barriers so she could infect more people. And that comes out in the dialogue we hear from her later, when it immediately goes from sweet to being very judgmental of the characters, asking Stokely, wouldn't you like to, finally join us and stop pretending to be something you're not, stop pretending to be an outsider, which, oof. And then later on when there's like that inevitable scene where one character walks in and there's two people who might have been pod people and they're both pointing fingers at each other, and it's Stokely and Mary Beth in this case. And Mary Beth's going, how can any of us know what you are anymore? Gay, straight, what the fuck are you supposed to be? I feel like that more or less speaks for itself. But in that same scene, they're all just like, Mary Beth, why are you naked? Because she is suddenly naked after that, after she has shed her clothing, turned into a giant alien queen, and then turned back. So it's kind of contrived unnecessary nudity, but also funny because she's trying to point fingers and be judgmental, but she's standing there without any clothes on, like it's no problem. But then she tries to turn that around and being like, you like what you see? And it's just like, come on. But we've also at that point seen Mary Beth sniff the stuff to prove that she's not an alien. So they're just like, but you passed the sniff test. How is it that you're an alien? And then it goes back and shows us all of this stuff of how she, with her weird alien anatomy, was able to fake sniffing the drug. And that felt like a bit of a plot convenience to me. I was able to go with it, but it felt a little bit like, it would have been nicer if instead of just going back and being like, here's all the stuff you missed but wasn't actually there to begin with, having it be an earlier scene with tiny little context clues. So if you go back and you're looking for it, you can see her faking the sniff test. I would have liked it to feel a little bit less like a last-minute plot convenience and a little bit more like something they were clearly trying to do the whole time. And then finally, based on like all of the stuff Mary Beth is monologuing at them as the final act of this movie happens. I really liked sort of the overall idea that the alien company line is that if you join us, you can be different, you can be special, you can break out from your personal norm and be part of something bigger. But by breaking away from what normal is for you individually, you lose that individuality and become a pod person and a part of this big collective. So it's very much this story about wanting to find acceptance and wanting to be a part of something bigger, but having to literally change who you are to fit into that and the horror of that, covered in gooey alienness and tentacles. And I thought that was delightful. Having a character in there like Stokely, who feels very much like the basket case character from The Breakfast Club, it feels, to a degree, even though I feel like they go back on it a little bit at the very end, it feels a little bit like a fuck you to the ending of The Breakfast Club, where she ends up changing and coming out in the pink dress and everybody being like, woohoo, we fixed her. And it's just like, no, you should not have to change to fit in and have that be your character arc to being part of something greater. Stokely does have a boyfriend by the end of this, but I refuse to believe that she has changed her personal style, and once again, I made an executive decision, she's bi. Fuck you. I love just the overall look of the movie. It very much looks like a lot of other teen movies of the time, particularly Scream, albeit a little bit more stylized in terms of lighting and stuff. And I love the costuming, particularly for Stokely, because I am obsessed with her whole aesthetic. But my favorite visual in the whole movie is during Mary Beth's final monologue, where she's just walking through the locker room, just in the form of a girl, albeit naked, but her shadow is just casting all of these huge tentacles over the wall, and it's very just imposing and almost Lovecraftian, and I love it. And yeah, that is The Faculty. I did have, again, some little nitpicks with it. Another thing that I can nitpick about it is that basically all of the Black characters in this movie are some kind of bully, whether that's an actual like jock bully on the football team or a pod-peopled police officer. But I ended up, like, as soon as I finished this movie, just giving it 5 stars in Letterboxd because I loved it that much. If you're a fan of things like, you know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Scream, The Craft, any kind of like teen-centric supernatural story from this time frame, or even other teen movies like The Breakfast Club or Empire Records, or, you know, sci-fi horror movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or The Thing, I think this movie has a lot to say, but is also just a really fun thrill ride, and it has its rough patches, but all in all, it's just everything I wanted it to be, and I love it, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. That is my review of The Faculty. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!